Tonight on PBS News Weekend, the growing divide between American conservative Catholics and Pope Francis over the direction of the church. Then, after actor Matthew Perry's autopsy says he died from the acute effects of ketamine, a closer look at the drug and its increasing use. And we meet the first group of inmates to graduate from Northwestern University's prison education program.
This is what equal opportunity looks like. When there's not the roadblocks that's keeping us from being able to compete. And if you give us that chance to succeed, like I said, the cream is going to rise to the top.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
Have a nice day.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Tonight, fresh questions are being raised about the conduct of Israeli ground forces in Gaza after military officials said that the 3 hostages mistakenly killed were carrying a white flag and were shirtless, both apparent efforts to show they were unarmed. An Israeli military official who spoke on the condition of anonymity said the soldiers thought the 3 posed a threat. The official also said the troops violated Israel's rules of engagement, and the incident is being investigated at the highest level. It's increased public pressure on the Israeli government to release Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the 129 or so remaining hostages. Hundreds of protesters blocked traffic in Tel Aviv last night.
We demand that the Israeli government talk to us today and explain to us what proposal is on the table. And don't wait for the USA. That's what is needed. If not, my child comes back in a bag. And I'm sure none of you would want to see their child return in a bag.
In a news conference today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggested that new talks may be underway to recover the hostages. For the first time ever, a Roman Catholic cardinal has been convicted by the Vatican Criminal Court. Cardinal Angelo Becciu was found guilty today of embezzlement and sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. That ends a complicated 2.5-year financial trial that aired some of the Vatican's dirty laundry. Becciu was acquitted of other charges, including money laundering and abuse of office. His lawyers said they will appeal. And Florida Governor and Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis escalated the war of words with Donald Trump, saying that if the former president loses the Iowa caucuses next month, he'll cry fraud. DeSantis spoke with reporters in New Hampshire.
If Trump loses, he will say it's stolen no matter what. Absolutely. He will try to delegitimize the results. I don't think there's been a single time he's ever been in competition for something where he didn't get it, where he's accepted. I don't think he will do that. So I think he's doing that. I think that that's to be expected, but I don't think people are going to buy it.
Trump currently has a commanding lead in the contest for the Republican presidential nomination. His campaign has accused DeSantis of trying to rig the Iowa caucuses. Instead, his comments showed his true colors as a Democrat surrogate. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, a look at the risks and rewards in prescribing the drug ketamine. And Northwestern University's prison education program graduates its first class.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
As millions of American Catholics prepare to mark the third Sunday of Advent tomorrow, the Pope's efforts to make the church more inclusive for LGBTQ plus people and for women, and urging vaccinations against COVID They're creating a growing rift between traditionalist American Catholics and the Vatican. Ali Rogan has more.
Over the last 10 years, Pope Francis has gained the adoration of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world for his humility, care for the poor, and for steering the church to reform its stances on some social issues. While the most recent polling from 2021 shows Francis has the support of the majority of Catholics in the U.S., conservative clerics and lay people in America are some of his most vocal critics. In November, the Pope moved against two of his loudest detractors, Bishop Joseph E. Strickland and Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke, both Americans. Last month, Strickland was removed as bishop of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. Then a few weeks later, Cardinal Burke was stripped of his Vatican privileges, housing, and salary. David Gibson is the director of the Center of Religion and Culture at Fordham University. David, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk first about the type of Pope Francis has been. What sort of reforms and changes to the church has he focused on?
Pope Francis is really focused on being a pastor, providing a more pastoral, inclusive, merciful church, going out to the peripheries, those who are in suffering. So that's been his signature, is really going out and helping those, the poor, the homeless, the immigrant, the refugee. So he's seen as this very merciful figure. What he's not terribly merciful towards are the elites in the church, the powerful, those who have all the privileges and all the perks. And we've seen how he's moved against some of them in recent months.
And is it that the American Catholic bishops, leaders who have criticized him, are they considered elites in church standing? And why is it that they seem to have been among the most vocal critics of Pope Francis?
Well, the opposition to Pope Francis is very loud and it's very influential, but it's really very small and very much located in the Anglosphere, especially in the United States. There's a lot of big money behind this conservative movement, so they have this great profile and, again, a certain degree of influence, but they're relatively small. But they have a certain approach that kind of tracks the political trends in the United States, and they don't like what Pope Francis is doing. He's really upending all of the customs and all of the privileges that these bishops and cardinals were used to, and they really don't like that. If you step back from the disagreements over politics, over doctrine, over ideology, a lot of this is simply the fact that these are bishops and cardinals who had the inside track under the previous pontificates, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, for over 35 years. Now you have a pope who was elected 10 years ago who upends all of that. He's the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere. He's from Argentina. He's not going to play favorites in the way that the other popes used to.
And what does it say about the state of American Catholicism that Pope Francis enjoys relatively high approval ratings among the majority of American Catholics, and yet he's coming under criticism from some American leaders?
Well, what those high approval ratings say is that Catholics always like the singer, even if they don't like the song. It also indicates, again, that this conservative opposition to him, this really vocal opposition to him based in the United States, is very small. That doesn't mean it's not influential and it's not damaging. You have to remember that the American Catholic Church is just 5% of the global 1.2 billion member church. So we tend to forget that. And even within the 65 million member Catholic Church in the United States, these real conservative elements are a minority.
We mentioned these two Catholic leaders in the United States that Pope Francis has punished. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and what they've said about him that elicited this response?
Well, these two cases, one of Bishop Joseph Strickland in Tyler, Texas, diocese in East Texas, and Cardinal Raymond Burke, who's lived in Rome and also in Wisconsin, they're distinct in the sense that they're both been longtime critics of Pope Francis. But Bishop Strickland, his diocese really was not being well run. Pope Francis has been extremely patient over 10 years with his critics, like Cardinal Burke, who's been a longtime thorn in his side, and even with Joseph Strickland, who's endorsed some of the most virulent attacks against Pope Francis. But in the case of Bishop Strickland, his diocese, the morale was down. The diocese is divided. Administratively, it's a mess. Pope Francis finally said, you can't be a bishop of this diocese. You remain a bishop, but we need to replace you. In the case of Cardinal Burke, you've got a 75-year-old cardinal who's living in a 4,500 square foot apartment in Rome with a $60,000 a year stipend. He spends, no one knows, maybe a month total in Rome. He has no job there. He's got all these perks and privileges. The Pope finally said to him, look, you can still be a cardinal. You can still vote in the next conclave. You could even be elected Pope after I leave the scene. But we, the Vatican, are not going to give you a stipend anymore, and we're not going to give you a free apartment. You can keep the apartment. You just need to pay for it.
In terms of his response to these critics and what you've laid out as inefficiencies in their diocese, what does that tell us about the type of Pope that Francis is and the type of leader and the type of human that he is?
Pope Francis has really been patient. He's resisted moving against some of these critics. Again, the criticism against Francis is of an entirely different category than the dissent was from the left against John Paul II and Benedict XVI. These bishops and cardinals aren't just disagreeing with the Pope. They're saying he's not a legitimate teacher of the faith. Some of them are even saying he's not a legitimate Pope. It's almost like accusing the president of sedition. Any bishop, in a sense, can be his own Pope in the social media sense. And Francis has not wanted to create other rival voices out there. But at a certain point, he has to lose patience. Just this month, he turns 87 years old. Time is running out for Francis, and he had to make some moves.
David Gibson with Fordham University, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
A coroner's determination that actor Matthew Perry died from the acute effects of ketamine is drawing new attention to the drug. It's a powerful anesthetic intended for use during surgery, but it's also become a popular treatment for some mental health problems. And because of its psychedelic effects, it's also used recreationally. Perry's autopsy report says the 54-year-old actor was on ketamine therapy, but that the level in his system was too high to have come from his last known therapy session. According to a healthcare analytics firm, since 2017, ketamine prescriptions have shot up 500%. For-profit clinics and telehealth services prescribe it for chronic pain, depression, anxiety, and other conditions, none of which are approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Medical professionals warn there's limited research into the effects of long-term ketamine use. Dr. Caleb Alexander is a professor of epidemiology and medicine at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Alexander, thanks for being with us. First of all, just tell us, what does ketamine do and why would it be preferable in surgery over something else?
Well, ketamine is a very rapidly acting anesthetic, and it was developed in the 1960s to treat people with battlefield trauma and in highly supervised clinical settings, like an operating room. And so in this instance, it was well studied, and the Food and Drug Administration approved it, believing, I think rightly, that it was safe and effective in these settings.
Patients who are prescribed this by clinics and telehealth operations who use it long-term or chronically, are they reporting having disturbing side effects?
Yeah, well, it's important to emphasize that the safety and effectiveness of a drug isn't a static feature of the drug, any more so than we would say that a hammer or a roll of duct tape is good or bad. But what we're seeing with these clinics is that ketamine is being used not for treating someone that's having their appendix taken out, it's being used to manage depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic non-cancer pain. So it's being used in ways that are vastly different than the ways in which it's been studied by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
And what are the risks in that?
Well, I think they're huge risks. I mean, when we think about whether or not a drug should be used, it's not just about benefits and it's not just about safety. It's about the balance of benefits and safety. And in the case of ketamine, for these sorts of uses, for anxiety or for post-traumatic stress disorder, not only do we not know very much about whether it's effective, there are also real risks, risks including neuropsychiatric effects that can be long-term, cardiovascular effects, changes in blood pressure, in the body's circulation, and bladder effects, an inflammation of the lining of the bladder, to name just a few.
Why do you think it's become so popular among clinics and telehealth providers to prescribe it? Why are the prescriptions shot up so much?
Well, it's a very good question. One factor, I think, is simply greed. It's the profit motive of the clinics and the telehealth companies that can stand to gain tens of thousands, millions of dollars through its sale. We also have seen a surge of interest in the use of psychedelics, things such as psilocybin, which is derived from mushrooms, and a surge of interest in the use of psychedelics for the treatment of psychiatric illness. I think both of these are factors that may be contributing.
And this is also prescribed for chronic pain?
It is, and it's worth noting, unfortunately, we're still in the midst of an opioid epidemic, and we've lost far too many lives from opioids, and I think we've learned the hard way that in most instances that prescription opioids are not great medicines for the management of chronic non-cancer pain. And this too may be driving some interest in the use of ketamine, but I certainly wouldn't say that we have more evidence for ketamine than opioids for these instances.
Now explain to us, I guess it's a loophole in regulation that allows a doctor who never sees the patient in person, who does it by Zoom, to prescribe a psychedelic to somebody in that way.
The bottom line is that there is an important loophole in our system of regulating how prescription drugs can be marketed, and this loophole needs to be closed. We have a patchwork of regulations by the Federal Trade Commission, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and consumer protection laws, and these restrict how pharmaceutical companies, the makers of ketamine, can market and promote the drug. But they don't necessarily restrict how other companies, these telehealth companies and freestanding clinics, can market and promote the drug. The bottom line is that our regulations governing drug promotion were conceived and were written in an era before these companies existed. And so we now have companies that are exploiting these loopholes and marketing this drug, making wildly outlandish claims about its safety and effectiveness.
Someone who has chronic pain, someone who's suffering from depression or anxiety, hears these claims. What would you want them to know and think about before they go to their doctor and say, hey, how about trying this?
One of the most important lessons that I think we've learned from the opioid epidemic is that we have many tools in the toolbox. We have many tools in the toolbox to manage chronic pain, and we also have many tools in the toolbox to manage depression and other psychiatric illness. And I think it's vital that we keep in mind that we do have options. I'm talking about both pharmacologic options, prescription drugs, and also non-pharmacologic options. So I think both of these are important to keep in mind.
Dr. Caleb Alexander from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
The men you're about to meet have been called many things, mostly inmates. But these residents of a maximum security Illinois State Prison have been adding new titles: student, scholar, author, and now college graduate. Last month, they became the first class of incarcerated graduates from Northwestern University's Prison Education Program, and more are on the way. This report is from Brandis Friedman of Chicago member station WTTW.
The first graduates in custody in the entire United States of America to earn a bachelor's degree from a top 10 university.
The month of November is not the typical graduation season. But that's not the only reason today was a long time coming for this class of 2023.
5 years ago, this moment right here, I definitely wouldn't have foreseen it.
Last week,
We first met Bernard McKinley and his 15 classmates a year ago, midway through their last year at Northwestern, one of the country's leading research universities. Professors and teaching assistants making the regular trip to Stateville Correctional Center near Joliet for classes. In between classes, students doing the work behind prison walls.
This cohort survived the pandemic. They did, physics by correspondence. We had staff driving boxes to and from. It's really a community grassroots effort. Demetrius Crichton.
Their ceremony, a clear celebration in a place where there is often little to celebrate. Each graduate gave a 2-minute speech.
This moment is the culmination of literally 30 years of people pouring into me.
Demonstrating what they've learned.
When you come to prison, you're going to get an education no matter what, I guarantee it.
And how they intend to use it. One of the graduates is 44-year-old Andre Patterson, serving a 60-year sentence for murder. His coursework in cultural performance studies inspired his graduation speech.
I really wanted to convey the challenges that I had to personally overcome. But along the way, while I was facing those personal challenges, I kind of had a realization that I wasn't going through this just for me. I'm going through this for all of us, my community here, but also the community on the outside.
Patterson grew up in Evanston, in the shadow of Northwestern University, never thinking he would someday hold a degree from the elite institution. Though he does today, it's not the diploma he's most proud of.
These aren't the things that's the most significant to me. This achievement it's a significant achievement, but it's the journey to get here, and it's the potential possibility of what I can contribute.
Another show of how exceptional scenes like this are. Renowned author and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates served as commencement speaker.
I read someone here was, coping with stage 4 prostate cancer as they went through the program, And brother, you the same one that, this is your book too, right?
Telling the men how much he can relate to where they come from.
I was arrested for the first time in my life when I was 14 years old. I was arrested for assaulting a teacher.
He's had his own brush with the criminal legal system, but with clearly different outcomes.
And I knew I had to come because I don't know you, but I know you. I don't know you, but I love you.
Throughout the ceremony, there were multiple cheers for one person in particular.
We love you,
Jennifer Lackey.
Professor Lackey.
Professor Jennifer Lackey.
The program's director and driving force, and the cohort's strongest advocate, Professor Jennifer Lackey, who says she does this work in part to make an example.
Places like Northwestern with kind of immense resources and excellence really should be the ones to step up to do this work. I think that what we want to do is set a model for what prison education can look like. We want to show what's possible and that you can truly offer the same quality of education that you provide on your campuses, even a facility that has maximum security students in it.
Lackey also wants to inspire hope.
This is a community too. And I think a lot of people are very directed at what do you do with this on the outside? This is a space too where there are lives being lived, and being able to bring mentors and tutors and TAs to this space is life-changing for many of the men here in this community and for their children and mothers and loved ones back home.
While some of these men may only apply their degrees from inside prison, others will return to their communities. Bernard McKinley is one of them. Sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder, he's going home in March after 19 years on the inside.
This is what equal opportunity looks like. When there's not the roadblocks that's keeping us from being able to compete with the other social dynamics that's put in place to hinder us. And if you give us that chance to succeed, like I said, the cream is going to rise to the top.
For PBS News Weekend, I'm Brandis Friedman in Chicago.
One of last month's graduates, James Jimmy Soto, walked out of prison a free man this week after he was exonerated. He had spent 42 years in prison and is now in his 60s. And now online, a look at what experts believe the United States can do to slash domestic emissions and curb global warming. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. Tomorrow on PBS News Weekend, how a delay in releasing the government application form for federal student grants and loans is affecting colleges' decisions on their financial aid offers. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular, this is Sam.
How may I help you?
This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.